So, and if we read the lesson, we're going to find out that we had a fruitless fig tree coming up in this lesson, and that fruitless fig tree was found in Bethpage. So from Mark's standpoint, when we go through it, we understand that that town was named Bethpage based upon this experience that Jesus had with that fruit tree, that fig tree. And that's where the name came from, and that's where we see this, like with the book of Mark, where we see him talking about, well, Bethpage and Bethany. And Bethpage meaning the house of unripened figs. So we go in here, but the interesting thing we find is, it says, Jesus into the village over against you, and as soon as you be entered into it, you'll find a colt tied therein, where a donkey.
Fulfill prophecy from Isaiah.
Yeah. So if we go to, we go and we look at prophecy, particularly Zechariah chapter 9. So let's go to Zechariah chapter 9. Let's take a look at it real quick. Let me know when you get there. Anybody there? Let's read Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9. Who has that?
Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding on a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey.
There we go. So Zechariah is prophesying about Jesus' entry into Jerusalem. And if you remember a while back, we did a sermon on Peter and Peter walking on water. And during that sermon, I mentioned that when Jesus called Peter to come out onto the water, there was nothing in this world physically that could stop Peter from doing that, performing that, because Jesus had called him. The only thing that could have stopped that would have been Peter's refusal. And here, it's the same thing. We see this, and Jesus is saying, okay, there's a colt. It's over in this town. Nobody has ever sat on it, and go and get it. But he also says, and if anybody says to you, why are you doing this? Why are you taking this animal? It's not yours. Just say that the Lord has need of it. So let's read verses 4 through 6. Anybody have that?
And they went away and found a colt tied at the door out in the open street. And they untied it. And those who stood there said to them, What are you doing, untying the colt? And they told them what Jesus had said, and they let him go.
So, do we see that? Would we ever do that today? If somebody you didn't know come up and wanted to take one of your animals? Say, well, the Lord needs it. Would we normally just say, yeah, go ahead? It's all yours? So, I think that from that standpoint, we don't know anything about the people that they came to with the colt. We do know, Mark's mother was involved in the Passover supper. It was their home and stuff like that. But from this place, we don't know who was involved with that, with the colt. Jesus did have a very large amount of followers. So if they knew that Jesus was asking for it, they would have probably just said, yeah, of course. So, but it's one of those examples of when Jesus calls that we can be rest assured that he will, when he calls, that nothing will be able to prevent that from happening, as long as we don't do it in our hearts. So we'll continue on, verse 7. And I'll read from verse 7 through 10. And they brought the colt to Jesus and cast their garments on him, and he sat upon him, and many spread their garments in the way, and others cut down branches off the trees and strawed them in the way. And they that went before and they that followed cried, saying, Hosanna, blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. Blessed be the kingdom of our father David that cometh in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest. People were pretty excited about Jesus entering the city right there. This time. What about the other time? No, not really. He just kind of walked in through one of the gates. And we can assume that he came in through the Golden Gate with this, and it was done. I'm from our going back into it. You know, we can look back and we can see from Isaiah, and we can see stuff like that. We can see that Solomon came into the city, be king riding upon a colt. So this was Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem, wasn't it? If we look at it from that standpoint, Jesus was coming into Jerusalem, and he was declaring his rulership by coming in on a colt. But what are the people that are doing? Yeah.
No longer after that, all these people was enrolled in the crucified him.
Yeah. They were very excited. And they were actually doing all the things that would have needed to be done to bring in a new king into Jerusalem. They were laying down the branches, palm branches and everything to lay down. Their garments were being laid out, and straw was being put so that he'd come in on a carpet, so to speak. And they were crying out, Hosanna, in other words, blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. These are the things that we find in Psalms. Psalms 118 and 149, if I remember right, or 148. Psalms 118, 148, they talk about Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the highest, the entrance of the kingdom, and king into the kingdom of Jerusalem. And it's interesting, sometimes when I'd read through it, and I don't know, maybe you have in the past as well, wondered, well, why did all these people start doing this? Anybody else ever wondered that? So here's Jesus. He's been around for a few years, and he's going to come into Jerusalem. But instead, on this time, he goes and he gets a colt, and then everybody's already lined up when he comes in. Everybody's already there. They're shouting the praises, the triumphal entry of their king into Jerusalem. They're excited about this. How did all that come to place? Anybody? Any ideas? Now, we know that we all have free will, so it's not that God ordained that all people should come together and announce their Jesus as a king. But remember back when Jesus fed the 5,000 men. What did they want to do? They wanted to make him king. When Jesus was healing the sick, they wanted to make him king. When Jesus raised Lazarus just recently, now no army can be defeated. They wanted to make him king. So throughout Jesus' ministry these last 3 years, the people, and this was where the struggles were between the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the people of Israel, they loved him. And the Pharisees, Sadducees hated him. And I know hate's a strong word, but I think it's appropriate. Especially when we go to verse 17, we see, or verse 18, when they talk about how wanting to destroy him. But even though they were restrained because of the people. They were very restrained in what they did with Jesus because of the people, just like they were restrained over John the Baptist because of the people. So if they're being restrained because of the people wanted him to be king. If they see Jesus now on the donkey, on the colt, the foal of a donkey, coming into town, he's finally declaring that he is the Lord, he is the king. And they were very excited about it. So what were the people's thoughts? What was he going to do as king? Any?
Kick out the Romans.
What's that?
Kick out the Romans.
Kick out the Romans? Okay. He was going to bring them out from underneath Roman rule, take their city back, No more Roman governors over Jerusalem anymore. No more Pontius Pilate or Herod, and all these other things going on in their districts. That was their thoughts, wasn't it? And they were very excited about it because with somebody that can feed armies, Anita?
Try to put yourself in their place. If you'd been oppressed for so many years with a certain rule or democracy, you would want to be freed from that. And here came this man who was healing and kind and gentle and loved people. And they said he would be the perfect king. So that was their mindset. We're going to be free of the Romans. We don't have to be oppressed anymore. And they didn't have the mindset of eternal life yet, and looking at him as the true Son of God. That would come later with some.
Yeah. And if we think about it, what was Jesus preaching? Have life and more abundant. He was talking about an eternal life. He was talking about the joy of the kingdom of heaven, and he was talking about doing his Father's will, God's will. He was at least considered to be a great prophet. But for the majority of them, he was considered to be the Messiah, coming to take them out from underneath Roman rule.
I think that there's a part of this story that we tend to overlook, and part of that is because we live in an age of automobiles. We don't live in an age of riding animals anymore. But I think that it would have been very important and frankly astonishing. I don't know how many of you have ever seen the first time a horse gets ridden, but it isn't placid, it isn't calm, and usually the rider doesn't stay on. But the Bible clearly says here that nobody had ridden this animal before. So I think that there's an area of astonishment around this whole story also.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Never really even thought about that. So we have an animal that normally would not have been ridden. So bucking bronchos comes to mind, right, Lori?
Another thought was Hosanna, and I kept thinking, I know what that means, but I don't remember. And Hosanna means save us.
Mhm.
So I think that goes back to what you were saying. They wanting him to be king, wanting him to be king. Now he's coming in on the colt and miraculously not getting booted off. Here's our king, save us, save us.
Absolutely. So the way Jesus is speaking, if our focus or their focus at that time would have been on earthly things, they would have hearing him talking about living a life more abundantly, having never being thirsty again, having the bread of life and being able to have a joyful experience and live a life more abundant, all these things, and then being able to heal those that become sick. So nobody has to be sick anymore. Being able to raise those that have died, so nobody has to mourn anymore. And being able to feed everybody with nothing. From that standpoint, why would you not want him to be the king? And unfortunately, he was looking at, everybody was looking at an earthly kingdom.
Also, they understood that it would be the line of King David. And King David was the pinnacle of the Israelite nation. It was the golden era. They were a nation to be considered if you looked at world politics. So you also have the idea of we're important in the world then, and we are not important in the world now, and we would like to be important again.
Yeah. From David to Solomon, Jerusalem, Israel was a kingdom that was respected, feared, admired among the entire world, wasn't it? So here we go, and it's funny how emotions can change so quickly. And we can see as we go through here, when we go through chapter 11, this is what I find interesting, chapter 11 and chapter 12. We can see Satan working. And we can see Satan poking holes at Jesus wherever he can, pushing buttons, whatever he can do. Because after verse 11, it says, Jesus entered in Jerusalem into the temple. He looked around, but evening was come, so he went back to Bethany with the 12. So he goes back to Bethany. He's in Bethany, and then we have verses 12 through 14. Can somebody read 12 through 14?
Now the next day, when they had come out from Bethany, he was hungry, and seeing from afar a fig tree having leaves, he went to see if perhaps he would find something on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. In response, Jesus said to it, "Let no one eat fruit from you ever again." And his disciples heard it.
Seems like a little odd, doesn't it? So here's Jesus going to a tree. There's no figs. Wasn't really the time for figs yet anyway. And he says, let no man eat fruit forever on this tree. We find out later that the tree withered and died. But it's really interesting why he did this with the fig tree. So first, just a little bit of background on fig trees. Fig trees, when they maintain their leaves through the winter, many times they will be producing fruit long before the springtime comes up. So this was wintertime. It was coming into the springtime where Jesus is here in Jerusalem. The fig tree has leaves on it. So at that time, if the fig tree has leaves, people would expect that there would be fruit on that tree. Even though there's not fruit on most of the tree, but it's already had the leaves. It maintained its leaves through the winter, so now it's producing fruit. And the fig tree is an interesting tree. So we're going to turn to Luke chapter 13 real quick. Because we're going to go to the parable of a fig tree. And Luke chapter 13, verse 6 through 9 is what we're going to read through. And I think as we read through this, we can understand and we can see what Jesus was doing with this fig tree. Because it wasn't just that he was hungry, it didn't have any fruit, so he's like, oh, you're a bad tree. It was about a lesson. It was Jesus trying to teach his disciples and us a lesson about the fig tree. And Luke 13, when he gives this parable, I think this is really important. So it starts out, and he spake also this parable. A certain man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard. And he came and sought fruit thereon, and he found none. Sound familiar? So he came to the fruit tree, or the fig tree, and he was looking for fruit. It should have had fruit. It had leaves on it, but it didn't have any leaves on it. Now, this fig tree was planted in the vineyard. And a fig tree is actually important to plant in a vineyard. And they typically put fig trees into a vineyard because they're in a symbiotic relationship with grapes. So fig trees actually help nourish grapevines. And so the grapes can actually grow, and a fig tree is actually good for a vineyard. Now, when the figs fall and stuff like that, they help nourish the soil and different things. So fig trees were common to place into a vineyard for that reason. And so when he's going looking for the fruit on the fig tree, he finds it. He doesn't find it. Now, if it's not bearing fruit, it's not producing a benefit to the vineyard anymore. It is taking the nourishment from the ground, but it's not giving anything back. So it becomes a problem in a vineyard if a fig tree is not producing fruit, because now it's not supporting the vineyard in any way. It actually is just taking from it. So we had a fig tree that was in Bethpage, right outside of Jerusalem, and Jerusalem could be considered the vineyard of God. And so a certain man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard. He sought fruit thereon, and he found none, and he said unto the dresser of his vineyard, behold, these 3 years. How many years? 3 years. How many years was Jesus there? 3 years he came to Jerusalem. These 3 years I come seeking fruit on this fig tree, and I find none. Cut it down. Why come earth at the ground? Now we see the relationship between that fig tree and this parable. It's really interesting, isn't it? For 3 years, Jesus had been coming to Jerusalem looking for the fruits of his vineyard. God's vineyard, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, those that are supposed to be teaching God's law, those that are supposed to be reaching to the world. They're there, they're supposed to be producing fruit for the people. And 3 years he's come, and he's seen no fruit. So he says, why cumbereth it the ground? And the dresser, which is, and we can look at this as Jesus himself, answered him, saying, Lord, let it alone this year also, till I shall dig about it and fertilize it. And if it bear fruit, well, and if not, then after that thou shalt cut it down. Did God give Jerusalem, give Israel a longer time period after that 3 years to bear fruit? And what happened after that?